It's the Go Gopher Podcast with Mike Grimm, episode number 174. I am Mike Grimm, voice of the Golden Gophers, and welcome back to the podcast. I'm absolutely thrilled to be welcoming for the first time ever to our Go Gopher Podcast the longtime radio voice of the Indiana Pacers. Yes, we're going to talk some NBA hoops this week. He grew up in Minnesota, and he's a guy who's just fun to listen to. Mark Boyle's been the voice of the Pacers since 1988. He had an incredible call this week when Indiana rallied past Oklahoma City in that spectacular finish in Game 1 of the finals. It's a continuation of the amazing postseason run the Pacers have been on. Mark's one of the top announcers in the country, and I can't wait for you to hear our conversation this week. The Go Gopher Podcast is presented by alumni-owned Sunbelt Business Advisors and True North Mergers and Acquisitions. If you're a business founder planning to exit your business, start by contacting Sunbelt Business Advisors and True North Mergers and Acquisitions. Sunbelt serves more businesses up to $5 million in revenue than anyone, and True North M&A serves companies with revenues up to $150 million. Get a confidential, no-cost, no-obligation business valuation started today. Make the most of your life's work. Visit sunbeltminnesota.com or tnma.com today. And our thanks, as always, to CEO Brian Slipka for being a big supporter of Gopher Athletics and our Go Gopher Podcast. Affinity Plus Federal Credit Union is also a big sponsor of the Go Gopher Podcast. Life math is complicated, and Affinity Plus Federal Credit Union makes it easier with local financial experts available to help in person or virtually. You can go to affinityplus.org/GoGophers for all the info. That's affinityplus.org/GoGophers. The Go Gopher Podcast is also presented by OnX Maps. Find out how to download the OnX Hunt app for free by listening to the Go Gopher Podcast. We're podcasting episode 174 from the Aquarius Home Services studio. We invite you to subscribe to the Go Gopher Podcast. It's free to do so, and you can go back and listen to previous Go Gopher podcasts. Last week, for example, we talked Golden Gopher football with head coach PJ Fleck. He had a great conversation with me. Definitely worthwhile to listen if you haven't already heard it. This week, we're talking NBA basketball on the Go Gopher Podcast. The longtime and very talented voice of the Indiana Pacers, the great Mark Boyle, will join me next.
I'm Clay Geary, walk-on turned scholarship wide receiver for Gopher football.
And I'm Ben Utek, U of M alumni, Super Bowl champion, and Tony Dungy Uncommon Award winner.
We understand championship culture, which is why we're part of the True North family of companies.
True North invests in only elite teams, like the champion team at Sunbelt Business Advisors, Minnesota's largest seller of companies. To learn more about True North and our diverse family of independently owned companies, visit TrueNorthEquityPartners.com.
Keep the good times rolling without the regrets. Giggly THC beverages are your go-to for bold flavor and smooth vibes. Zero alcohol, no bad decisions. Just THC-infused cocktails, seltzers, and teas packed with natural ingredients and performance-boosting superfoods like ashwagandha and ginseng. Find Giggly at over 500 locations like Total Wine, MGM, and Cub Foods, or shop online at giggly.com. That's GIGLI.com. Ready to upgrade your drink game? Use the code Giggly North, as in Giggly Talk North. Giggly North, GIGLI North, for 50% off your first order. Giggly, sip smarter, feel better.
It's episode 174. It's our weekly Go Gopher podcast. We won't be talking a lot about the Gophers this week, but I think our fans will certainly enjoy hearing about what we're going to talk about. The NBA playoffs are going on. As we record, this is Friday, the day after the Indiana Pacers made a great comeback in Oklahoma City. They led for a total of 0.3 seconds. They trailed that game for 47 minutes and 58, 9 point whatever. And the radio voice of the Indiana Pacers, the great Mark Boyle, joins us here, and we got all kinds of things to talk about with Mark. But Mark, you are from Minnesota, so this is part of why I wanted to have you on. Great to see you, and thanks for spending some time during this busy time with us.
Oh, my pleasure. The only thing I regret about these finals, Mike, is I was hoping the Timberwolves would get there so I could get a paid vacation to my hometown, but it didn't work out. We've been there once, and that was in 2000. So this doesn't happen for us every day, and it's been pretty exciting.
Yeah, what a run, too. Obviously, the call last night, the game last night, it didn't look great, but you've had a few of these games now, Mark, where it didn't look great, right? And it's I think this was the fifth or sixth comeback of 15 or more points during this run.
And we've had one game in each series where we were down In the Milwaukee series, we were down 7 with 40 seconds to go. In the Cleveland series, in one of the games, down 8 with about 39 seconds to go. In the New York series, down 14 with 2 minutes to go. Won all of those, and then last night, like you said, behind for 47 minutes, 59 and 7/10 seconds before the game-winning shot. And we were talking about it after the game. As remarkable as last night was, we all agree that it was probably only the 4th most impressive comeback during this 17-game playoff run. It's really been surreal and unprecedented. And each time the Pacers pulled one of those off, there'd be a stat. You know how it is now. Stats are instantly available. They show up on social media. And I can't remember the raw numbers, but this will put it into perspective. It has happened 1,506 times that a team in the playoffs was down 8 with 40 seconds to go. Before tonight, they were 0 in 1,506.
Oh, my goodness.
And that happened 3-4 times. Once would be miraculous, but it's like standard operating procedure for this group.
Yeah. And there's something when it gets late in the game, and I think this is particularly true just generally in the NBA, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there's a mechanical piece to it that, look, if you're down, the teams aren't giving up or anything, but that's it, 1,000 and something and nothing. So as an announcer, just from a professional standpoint, how do you stay with it? I'm sure there are times if this game is in the middle of February, it's a little different. In the playoffs, you're going to, be on your game and have high octane. So I suppose you don't have to talk yourself into now believing that there's still an opportunity when you're down 14 early in the fourth quarter. But how as a broadcaster has that impacted maybe how you go about these late games when you're behind like this?
Well, you've had enough of these yourself. Maybe not quite to that extreme, but you know the answer to that, and it's partly based, at least in my opinion, on personality. I hope that the Pacers win, but I'm more focused on the broadcast. And I know the game situation. I know the score and time, but my primary focus is not thinking about, oh boy, they might win, but rather, let's make sure we call this next play correctly. But as you get closer to the finish line and you see that something special might be unfolding, now while you're calling the game, you're trying to, in the back of your mind, because I never rehearse with scripted lines. So if the Pacers do this, I'm going to throw this out there. So in the back of my mind, stuff's bouncing around like, if something happens, how am I going to do it? But you're so focused, you're kind of like myopic. You're just trying to make sure you call it correctly. And if you do get a chance to be the voice of an iconic moment in franchise history, and this is especially true in the social media era, you want to make sure you don't botch it. Because if you botch it, man, it's out there forever, and people are so critical. But you're not thinking, this, Mike, you're not thinking about that while you're actually making the call, but it does occur to you as the game starts to unfold and head in that direction.
Yeah, and you nailed the call.
Gilgeous-Alexander has it, 9 to shoot. The defender is Nembhard. Here comes the left-hand bounce, penetrates the arc. Nembhard cuts him off, and he missed off the back of the rim. Rebound, Indiana. 8 seconds to go. The Pacers are not going to call a timeout. Halliburton has it with 3, driving with 2, pulling up, and hitting with 0.3 of a second to go. How many more times can this team do that?
How much did you pay attention to it? It's out there everywhere now. You've probably heard it, 100 times or more. How much do you, say, oh, yeah, I nailed it, or I'm glad that happened? As you mentioned, you didn't botch it, certainly, and I know that people have loved listening to it.
Well, I always look at it this way. When I do go back and look at anything really, but specific to what we're talking about, even if I like the call, and the one from last night I thought was okay, but I'm still always thinking, boy, I could have done that better. For example, in that New York game, Halliburton hits a shot as time expired, and I thought it was a 3 in a game winner.
Yeah,
and so did most.
Yeah, everybody did, yeah.
The call was okay, and I didn't say the Pacers win the game, because when I looked up at the scoreboard to make sure there were zeros, and I saw 125 instead of 126 125, so we right away transitioned into it's a 2, not a 3. But I wish I would have known it was a 2, for example. So if you're serious about your craft, and it's not just broadcasting, even at least in my opinion, even if you think you did something well, you're always wondering, how could I have done that better? And I always give that some thought, because I do think it helps for the next time.
Yeah, I agree. No question about it. Mark, what do you think it is about this Pacers team right now? You've chronicled just what an amazing run this has been. What about their makeup and chemistry has allowed them to do what they've been doing?
Well, it's sort of hard to define. It's one of those intangible type things, but I wouldn't say they expect to do things like that because no one's ever done things like that. But they're a really confident, resilient group. They're never too far behind. They always continue to play with the pedal fully down. And the reality of all four of these situations is this: as well as they executed down the stretch in those games, you still can't win those games unless the other team screws up. For example, in the Milwaukee game that we referenced, Gary Trent dropped a ball out of bounds over on the sideline with nobody around him. And there's always something like that. Cleveland committed 3 turnovers in the final 40 seconds. Without the other team's gaffes, you can do whatever you want. You need help.
Yeah.
But they don't think of that. They just think, we're going to keep playing. We are pretty explosive. We play at a fast tempo. We're going to get opportunities. As long as we keep playing, there's a chance. And that's their attitude. And it's a quiet confidence. And we referenced this on the air last night. I don't know if TV showed this, but, the game ends and there's a brief celebration. But as they were walking off the floor, it was like they were leaving a practice. Nobody was celebrating. It was business as usual. There's still 3 more games to win. They're really focused. They play together beautifully as a group. And, I don't think they hope they're going to win. I think they think they're going to win.
Yeah, it's amazing. And then the Thunder heading into the series, Mark, were an overwhelming favorite. I don't bet, but I know that listening to some sports radio here locally where they do talk about those kind of things, it was crazy, and they were even surprised a little bit by the overwhelming nature of it. So now all of a sudden the Pacers go in and get game 1. I suppose that changes the nature of the series, not from a betting standpoint, but just from the series itself, I suppose, right?
Possibly. In regard to what you just said, they should be the heavy favorite. They were the best team in the league by a considerable margin.
Yeah.
And specifically to this matchup, the Pacers have a lot of things they do well. And in some of the earlier rounds, those played directly into the opponent's weaknesses, and they were able to exploit that. Everything Indiana does well, Oklahoma City does as well or better. For example, in last night's game, the Pacers almost never have trouble with turnovers, 3rd least turnover-prone team in the league. But the Thunder are the least turnover-prone team in the league, and they forced the most turnovers. And last night, the Pacers had 19 in the first half. So there are some things about this specific matchup that would make you think, if you were looking at it logically, that not only is Oklahoma City the favorite, but they're a solid favorite. That's the way I look at it. When people ask me, what do you think? Before the series started, Mike, I said, they are clearly better than the Pacers, but not so much better that they can't be beaten.
Yeah.
And we saw that last night.
Yeah, what a game. No doubt about it. It's funny, I was thumbing through my social media timeline on X or Twitter or whatever, and Timberwolves fans were commenting about, now Oklahoma City misses all the late shots. You did mention that, they do have to cooperate a little bit. I mean, game 4, the Wolves and Oklahoma City, Jalen Williams was taking crazy shots, fadeaway 20-footers and draining them, and the Wolves lose that game by 2. And really that was, for all intents and purposes, it ended the series. Last night, though, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander missed a couple of shots late. Jalen Williams missed a couple of shots late. Obviously, good defense is part of that. The Wolves defended well, I thought, late in that game 4, too. But you're right. You have to take advantage of some of those things. And then you've got to have a guy like Halliburton, who has done this before, go hit the shot.
Well, he's been the central figure in all 4 of these games. Last night, the shot at the end of the New York game that forced the overtime. He was big in the Cleveland game and the Milwaukee game. He's got the ball in his hands, and he's fearless, and he's confident, and he's good enough that he can generally get wherever he wants to go. The question then becomes, can he make the shot? And so far, he's been terrific. Now, the same situation might come up in game 2, and maybe he'll heave up an air ball. You just never know. But he has been, and the fans in Indianapolis have taken great delight in this poll of NBA players by now about a month or so ago, where he was the most overrated player in the league. There's T-shirts that say overrated on them, and the fans in our town have taken a great delight in the clutch performances of Halliburton here. And I don't know how familiar your fans are with his dad, John, who was actually banned from our building during the playoffs. He got into it with Giannis Antetokounmpo. I ran into him in the lobby of the hotel last night. We had our owners are great. They chartered 2 planes and brought the whole front office staff to the game, and so it was kind of a madhouse in the hotel lobby. And I ran into John, and he said to me, my son's making you famous, right? I said, well, that's one way to look at it.
That's one way to look at it. That's good.
Yeah, that is one way to look at it. Because you know this, as a play-by-play broadcaster, you can be really good, but especially if you're in a small market like we are, and if your team is nothing special, then people don't really know who you are. It's like being an artist, a painter, a pencil sketcher, whatever you want to call it. No matter how good you are, you still need material.
Yeah.
And they've given me material that really, to be honest, it would be pretty hard to screw up.
That's the beauty of it. You're right. Like in years I've always commented on that too. Just years, for example, with the Gophers, just for me personally, when the years that they've had really good teams, gone to the NCAA tournament, gone to bowl games, won 11 games in football in 2019, everybody knows who you are. And then I've been through 3 years, 9 wins in basketball, and nobody wanted to talk to you those years, right? So same basic play-by-play, but the team certainly impacts the reaction you get. There's no doubt about that.
100%. And we've been so fortunate. We've only been to the finals twice now, but in '94, the Pacers got there for the first time, and that was all. They were almost 20 years into the NBA by then. And that was also the first year they ever won a playoff series. But they've had pretty consistent success since then, which people don't really understand because they've only, in the 9 previous finals before this year, they lost 8. So they never got to the NBA finals except that one time in 2000, and they lost. But they've been to the conference finals 10 times since 1994, and there's only 2 other teams, Boston and Miami, that can say the same thing.
Yeah.
So they've been consistently good. They just haven't gotten over the hump.
Yeah. Well, let's hope this is the year to put rings on people. And they don't cut down nets, do they, in the NBA? They just take the rings and go.
No, they just have the midcourt ceremony with the trophy, and and then the ring presentation when the next season starts.
Yeah, no doubt.
I will say this, though. This to me is one of the cool things about the NBA. And I'll say this right up front. There is nothing better, in my opinion, than the Stanley Cup playoffs. Those are unparalleled in terms of coolness. Yeah. But the one thing the NBA does that most of these leagues don't, we don't do conference championship rings. You either win the championship and get a ring, or you don't.
Or that's it.
We don't have NFC championship rings or American League pennant winning rings or whatever they're all doing. You either win the championship and get a ring, or you don't. Yeah. And I like that.
Yeah, in college football, every bowl you win a bowl game and you get a ring, or you get whatever, or you win a conference title in most sports, and some team will give you that. But yeah, the NBA, you got to win it all if you're gonna put a ring on. That's for sure.
Pretty cool. I like it.
Let's jump in here real quick. Want to talk about 2 of our great sponsors. First, Affinity Plus. It's your local credit union proudly serving Minnesota since 1930. If you're a current Gopher student or a proud Gopher alum, that makes you eligible to join this financial that wants to build a meaningful banking relationship and put you first. You can meet with a local employee at any of their branches statewide. There's one here near campus in Minneapolis on University. To learn more and find other ways to connect, go to affinityplus.org/Go Gophers. That's affinityplus.org/Go Gophers. Affinity Plus Federal Credit Union, federally insured by NCUA. People-centered banking, perfect for Gophers. The weather's warming up as well, and that means it's time to put those ice augers away, and you can get out on the lake, get on the boat, and do some fishing. Let the OnX Fish app help you find the next best bite. The Fish app offers the most comprehensive fishing tool for increasing your success. Use the Fish app to find new places to fish. You can sort by species, abundance, trophy, and keeper potential. OnX Fish also shows you hot spots, lake-by-lake regulations, public and private land ownership info, and more. Right now, download OnX Fish on the App Store or go to onxmaps.com/fish to get more information about the app that's changing the game on the water. You mentioned the Stanley Cup playoffs. That's a good segue, I think, into chatting a little bit, if we can, about your Minnesota background. St. Louis Park is where you grew up, and a lot of our our longtime listeners probably will remember your late father, Joe Boyle, who did some North Stars games, and I think he even did some Gopher hockey and some other Gopher stuff. He did the state hockey tournament, which is, one of the great high school tournaments ever. In terms of national reputation, they sell out the XL Energy Center for those championship games, and it's still a big deal, certainly. Take me through what it was like growing up in St. Louis Park with a dad who was at all the big events.
He was a huge help to me because he was totally candid about the business. And I don't know if most people know this, but unless you get to a certain level, you can't even make a living doing this. And he was very open about how difficult it was, how sometimes it seems so random that you get an opportunity. We both know, guys, I'm sure, that are talented, but they just never got a break. Mm-hmm. And he would take me. He was also an anchor at what was then known as WTCN, Channel 11. He'd bring me into the studio once in a while so I could see how they did things. He would take me to an occasional game. But always he was honest with me. And because I started to think about doing this when I was, 15, 16. And he was always frank, and he was always honest, and he always spelled out the potential issues. So I had eyes wide open when I went in. I might have done it anyway, but that I knew how difficult it was, I think was beneficial, particularly in those early jobs. Now, I've been at this job for 37 years, but I started in 1978 in Miles City, Montana. I got here in 1988, and over the first 10 years, I worked in Miles City, Montana, Detroit Lakes, Dubuque, Iowa, St. Cloud, Minneapolis, New York, St. Louis. So that's 8 jobs in 10 years. It's a very transient business. I tell kids this, Mike, all the time. I would, when I speak to high school kids and college kids, I always say I would never discourage you if you find your soulmate. Go for it. But just keep in mind that these jobs are hard to keep, hard to get, and they're even harder to get if you have to think about a family.
Yeah.
I'm not saying don't have a family, but if you're single, you can, on a moment's notice, go from Detroit Lakes to Dubuque like I did. If you have kids in school, you've got to think about, well, is this the right move for the family? And in the end, if you're antisocial like me, it worked out okay. It's a good trade-off. But, for most people, I think they would say, yeah, okay, I didn't get where I wanted to go, but man, I got a great wife and some cool kids and memories, stuff I'll never have, but whatever works for you.
Yeah. Here you are all these years later. It's interesting too. I was in doing some research here. Your dad, it said he had done Gopher stuff, and obviously Ray Christensen is the preeminent. That's the guy we all, Hall of Famer, all-time great announcer, all-time great guy, maybe the nicest guy you'll ever meet. But what,
Mike, you must know this because you've been around long enough. Back in the day, there was no exclusivity.
Right, exactly.
So when I was in Dubuque, Iowa, there were 7 radio stations doing Iowa football.
Yeah,
I think Iowa might have been one of the very last to go exclusive.
It was, yeah.
In those days, if your station wanted to do it and pay what in those days was a very minimal rights fee, then you could do games. And so I was able to do games at a young age that I would never have a chance to do now because there'd be one outlet. But of course, we all know Ray. What a wonderful man he was.
Yeah.
He was doing it on WCCO, but I don't know if does the Minnesota News Network still exist?
Yeah. In fact, there's a guy. You're looking at the sports director of the Minnesota News Network.
Oh, I didn't know that.
That's my side job.
They used to do games for a couple of years.
Yeah.
J.G. Preston, who was their guy at the time, did Gopher football for, I think, 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
Back in the pre-exclusive days. So my dad did do Gopher football, theoretically competing with Ray.
Right.
He did that when he was in radio. He was at a station, I'm sure it's still there. Maybe it has different call letters. It was WLOL. It was a talk station back in those days.
Yeah.
So he did Gopher football for them. He did the Twins on television with Harmon Killebrew. He's done a lot of stuff. He passed away several years ago, but he really had a very good career.
Yeah, no doubt about it. You went from St. Cloud to Minneapolis and then St. Louis. It's funny because you and I have so you mentioned Dubuque, Iowa, and the 5 to 7. At one time, 17 stations were doing Iowa games. Muscatine, Iowa had a guy doing games, if you remember, way back in the day. Mason City, when it was. when it finally went exclusive, I was in Cedar Rapids at the time, and it was Des Moines, and then 2 stations in Cedar Rapids originated the games, all the games. Home games, an Iowa City station and a Mason City station paid for the home rights, and so up until like 1997, 5 stations were doing games at Kinnick Stadium. Think about that,
Yeah, I'm not surprised. Like I told you, there were 7 stations doing it when I was down there. And the guy that's doing it now, I'm sure you know well, Gary Dolphin.
Yeah,
he was a TV editor in Dubuque when I was there. And he also worked as a vice president at a bank.
That's what
and now he's Mr. Big, and he's been with the Hawkeyes for not 30 years, but close, right?
Since then, since 97 when they went exclusive, that's when he took over. And again.
Got his own sports bar in Dubuque, and he's like King Kong.
He is absolutely. And the funny thing, I actually was at his sports bar a few weeks ago. I was in Indianapolis. My niece graduated from Butler, and on my way through, my mom still lives down in Manchester, Iowa, which is right between Dubuque and Waterloo. So I visited her, and then she jumped in the car with me to go watch the ceremonies at Henkel Fieldhouse for my niece who graduated from Butler. But we made a stop at Dolph's Iron Bar in Dubuque to say hi to him.
Yep. We had a reunion there this summer. I hadn't been to Dubuque since I left, and that was 1985, I think. So 40 years.
Yeah.
It was good to see some of those people. I'd stayed in touch with some of them, but I hadn't been back to Dubuque. And as you might imagine, the whole city looked entirely different 40 years ago.
Yeah.
Some of the same stuff was still there, but it was fun to go back.
Yeah, that area down by the river's really, really nice. We mentioned Ray. Who were some of the other guys, maybe as you were growing up in Minnesota, that you listened to that maybe helped formulate, in addition to your father, of course, formulate your broadcasting style and the way you go about your work?
You don't appreciate this at the time, but as you get older and look back on it, I was so fortunate. I grew up listening to Hall of Fame broadcasters in every sport. You had Herb Carneal with the Twins. Ray Scott was there for a few minutes.
Yeah.
He also did the Vikings for a little while. You had Ray, of course. I actually got a chance to work with one of the guys I admired, Al Shaver, growing up. He was the North Stars guy. He just passed a year or two ago, well into his 90s.
Yeah.
And I never worked with Herb or Ray, but I grew up listening to them. I did work with Al, and just listening. They more than my dad were the reason I got into broadcasting, because I became so enamored. Now, in those days, people who are watching this and say, "Hey, he looks pretty old. How old is he?" I'm old enough that back in the day, there'd be like 20 Twins games on TV. And so radio was the way to follow the team. And I would become so fascinated sitting in my room at night, and the Twins would be on the West Coast, and Herb would be calling the game, and I could see it because he was so good. And that's the common denominator, in my opinion, of a great play-by-play guy, regardless of sport. And so my goal was, those guys are making me see something that I am not literally seeing. I want to see, can I do that?
Yeah.
And such great role models. Herb's in the Baseball Hall of Fame. Al's in the Hockey Hall of Fame. Ray Christensen has to be in some Hall of Fame
He's in
somewhere.
the College Football Hall of Fame, yeah. Yeah.
As he should be.
Yeah.
And so these are the kinds of guys that had an influence on me when I was growing up. And, you don't know this because you're a kid, but as you get older and realize how rare those kinds of talents are, to be exposed to guys like that in multiple sports was a big thing for me.
Yeah. Al Shaver's son, by the way, Mark, Wally Shaver, he has been the voice of Gopher hockey now for 30 plus years, since I think 86 was his first year doing Gopher hockey. So people listening to this podcast love Wally.
Isn't Wally's son, Al's grandson, was in the American Hockey League for a while.
I think he was doing games in Dallas, maybe in Houston and Des Moines at some point. I honestly, I'm not sure where he is now, but he was a third generation hockey broadcaster there. Yeah, absolutely. All right, so this is going to be totally offbeat, Mark. We've never talked about this. Do you remember being a counselor at the Roy Engelbrecht Sportscaster Camp of America?
Yeah. I'm going to tell you a story about that. I was there for 1 year. I don't even know how Roy knew who I was, but he asked me to come out there. And in those days, the NBA Summer League was in Long Beach. So we would take kids out to the Summer League and help them with their mechanics. It was a combination camp for kids and like a fantasy camp for adults.
Yeah.
We had guys that were successful professionals who just wanted to come and see could they broadcast games. And through that camp, I actually had a cup of coffee with Ronald Reagan.
Yes.
Because Roy knew everyone, and he somehow got Ronald Reagan to come and deliver the commencement address. The thing lasted a week, and it was in a motel, not a hotel. And somehow he knew Reagan. This was obviously after he was president. And because he had been, I don't know, I think this is fairly common knowledge, but he started his career as a sports broadcaster before he became an actor and then a politician. So the commencement was the very last thing on the schedule. So I go back to, clean out my room and get in my rental car and go to the airport. I'm walking down the hall, and I see Mr. Reagan coming toward me with two guys who I assume were Secret Service or security or what. And one of them says to me, do you know where we could get a cup of coffee? I said, yeah, there's a place here right around the corner. Let me show you. So I walked him around the corner, and I said, this is it. Go in there. They got coffee. And Mr. Reagan said, would you like to have a coffee with me? I said, what would I like to? Yes. Now, there were so many things I wanted to ask him that I felt were off the table. So I didn't. It was a very superficial chat about he wanted to know how it was working in the NBA. I wanted to know how it was to recreate games off the ticker. The whole thing lasted 6 or 8 minutes, but it was a blast.
Yeah.
But that's a long answer to your question. And why do you ask? Were you there?
So I was there in that year in 1990. So 19-year-old Mike Grimm had a counselor because we went to all kinds of things. So Bob Costas spoke that week. Chick Hearn spoke that week. Joel Myers.
If I remember, didn't Roy Firestone speak?
Roy Firestone spoke that week.
I know Joel spoke.
Joel Myers, that. Bob Miller, the voice of the LA Kings, gave the hockey deal. And then we went to Anaheim and did a baseball game. We did the summer league. I remember sitting there as a 19-year-old, and Sean Kemp was in that league that year as a rookie. And he stood in front of us. We were courtside at this Long Beach gymnasium, and he's the biggest human being at that. I'm just some, hayseed from Iowa sitting there looking up, and Sean Kemp walks up, and I'm like, that's the biggest human being I think I've ever seen in my life. And he was just, it stood out. He looked like he was chiseled out of stone. So he was in that league. So we did 2 or 3 games there. We did a game, USC, UCLA football on a TV screen. And so we had all this stuff going on. But the best part of the camp was we would have a cassette recorder, and then we'd go get a critique from you guys. You guys were the camp counselors. So my camp counselor, 19-year-old Mike Grimm's camp counselor, was Mark Boyle. How about
really?
that? Yes.
How about that? That's amazing.
Yeah, and the funny thing was Bill Roth. You remember Bill from Virginia Tech?
Bill
he was there that week as well, and so we had created a connection then. And then the Gophers have played Virginia Tech over the years, and they played in the bowl game this last year. So we talked about it then. I had him on the podcast, and we talked about it. So I'm sure my normal listeners of this podcast are like, "All right, enough on the sportscasters camp." But it was such a cool event, and it wasn't cheap. Like my parents had to scrape some money together. It was over $1,000, I think.
Was it?
Yeah, and this was 1990.
You know what, though? But for 7 days, lodging, food, and experience, that doesn't seem that expensive.
Not bad.
Although $1,000 35 years ago is different than $1,000 now.
But then you flew, but it was the food was all covered, the hotel was all covered, all the transportation was covered, and so here's what. So a buddy, a high school and college classmate, who are still great friends to this day. He went with me. We were college students at Luther College in Decorah, is where we went, Luther. And so we were doing games on our campus station, and we both wanted to be sportscasters. He ended up not getting into sportscasting, but to this day, so the biggest critique part that we'd come back and you'd listen to the tapes, and you would always tell us, Mark, I want to know how the ball got there. Was it a lob? Did he bounce it to him? Did he throw it? Did he rifle it to him? Did he wing it to him? Come up with a vocabulary that isn't just to him, or he passes there. And so I'm not making it up. All these years later, from 1990 till now, when my buddy and I talk, or he'll listen to a game, every now and then I'll get a text and say, you got to tell me, how did the ball get there? And that is from Mark Boyle. So it's pretty funny.
Oh, that's a small world, isn't it?
It is. It's pretty crazy. But I didn't want to spring that on you until we're actually live. So I wanted, to see what you thought. I went 1 year. So that was your only year then. I think it was 1990.
That was the only year I went.
Yeah.
I don't know how long it continued. I'm pretty sure it's not around anymore.
It is not. Yeah. I think it was like a 6 or 8 year run that they had with it. And I always kind of of wanted to go back. They gave us this big, it wasn't a 3-ring binder, but it had to have 200 pages of stuff. And I still use, I've upgraded it a little bit. I've altered it a bit, but the football spotting chart from that booklet is still what I use in general. There's some upgrades to it. To this day, when I do go for football, it's out of that spotting chart from the sportscaster camp.
That's amazing. I'm glad you waited to tell me this in a live setting.
Yeah.
Because I so cool.
Yeah, it was awesome. It was really good stuff. When we had a bowling, do you remember there was a bowl? Did you go to the bowling thing the last night, I think?
I might have. It's a long time ago. Yeah. I don't remember.
So there was this huge party. My buddy and I were college students, and many of the college students weren't old enough to drink, right? But the adults certainly were. And there was a couple of other guys in the camp that year. Dave Norrie was a UCLA quarterback who went on to work for ABC.
I stayed in touch with him for a few years after that.
But he went to the camp because he wanted to be a color commentator. And so Oral Hershiser's brother was there. So we bowled with those two guys, and they imbibed some. It was unbelievable for like two 19-year-old dudes from Iowa sitting there with those guys, and it was crazy. Yeah, it was a great experience. But think about that: Bob Costas, Ronald Reagan, Chick Hearn, Joel Myers, Roy Firestone, and then on top of all that, we get to go back and then have our stuff critiqued by guys like you and Bill Roth. I think Jim Kozimar, is that how you pronounce his name?
Jim was there.
I think he was there.
That's how I met Jim. He was at that camp. Brian Wheeler was there, who went on to be the Trailblazers guy for a number of years. It was like I said, I don't know how Roy knew all these people, but he knew everybody in the business.
Yeah, he had, he did. He was a boxing promoter, I think, at one time, too, and did some stuff for the Lakers. I think he worked for the Lakers at the time, too, with he put on sideshows. I think he did, like, dance competitions and stuff at the Forum and all kinds of stuff. But anyway, you were my camp counselor.
Wow. Well, so from now on, if any of your listeners have issues with your performance, they can just blame it on me.
Well, hopefully they're and you probably have this on occasion. If you get negative feedback, it's usually because something you said was stupid, right? I don't try to get into politics. I don't think any of my listeners know where I fall on the political spectrum. They shouldn't, whatever. But what I feel lucky about over the years, and it's probably part of the tutelage you gave me then, is I don't get much where people say, man, I listen to you and have no idea what's going on. And as long as people know what's going on, I can take all the other criticism, like, hey, you said this wrong, or you mispronounced a name, or, oh, yeah, I said they were in the bonus and they weren't. Okay, fine. You can't talk for 3 hours and not screw something up. But as long as they generally know what the heck is happening, I rarely get anyone saying, man, I'm lost when I listen to you. And so I feel good about that.
And that's in the big picture, that's the number one goal. When I was starting out, my goal, which I was convinced at the time was possible, I know now that it isn't, my goal is to do a perfect game. Never make a single mistake. And so when I was young and trying to establish myself, I would inevitably make that first mistake 30 seconds in or 3 minutes in, and then it would bum me out for like another 3 minutes before I got my act back together, until I finally realized it wasn't possible. And I never keep track of how many mistakes I make in a broadcast, but the broadcasts are over 2 hours long. If I make less than 30 mistakes, I'd be surprised. And I'm talking about things that only I know are mistakes.
True, yeah, same. And sometimes I'll have someone say that I said something, and I'll say, I don't think so. And then I'll go back and listen, and I did. And I'm like, I don't know why I would have said his name there or why I would have called him that. But your mind works in funny ways sometimes. The other thing, my theory all along, and I've actually had this debate with other broadcasters, so I'd be interested in your thought on it, is if I do make a mistake, I will, most of the time, although I do it less now than I used to, I'll correct it. I'll say, no, that wasn't this, that was this. He didn't score, this guy scored, or that was not his rebound, it was this rebound. And my goal all the time was, and this is pretty lofty as well, much like your perfect game, is I wanted, no one does this, but you still hear announcers say, well, if you're scoring at home, is if someone happened to be scoring at home and they don't have the TV and they're listening to me and they're going to score based on what I said, at least the points and rebounds should be right. I need to credit everyone that gets a point and a rebound. And so that's why I correct it. I've had one of my engineers over the years has said, you shouldn't do that because then people say, God, Grimm makes a lot of mistakes. And so actually I have backed off it a little bit. But my goal all along was, well, if some guy's sitting at home, I want him to know who really did score the point. Because, sitting court now, you guys in the NBA don't sit courtside as much as you used to because they've loaded that up with premium seating. We still at the college level, and I frankly prefer to be kind of up off the floor anyway, but you get screened by stuff and sometimes you can't see and you're looking through an elbow, a referee's elbow and the coach is in front of you and whatever. So there are times where you misidentify a guy. So what is your theory? Do you want to correct the mistake or do you just let it go so people don't think you made a mistake?
It depends what the mistake is. Your philosophy pretty much mirrors mine. If I say, for example, if I say that's Nembhard's second foul and then I see it's his third, then I will say, I stand corrected. That's his third foul. Yeah, because it's a part of the story. And if a guy has 2 fouls instead of 3, that's important.
A factor. Yeah.
If it's a more subtle mistake that nobody except me realizes, then I'll probably let it go.
Yeah.
But factual errors like number of fouls, number of points, biggest lead in the game, those things, if I make a mistake, I will immediately, as soon as I learn it was a mistake, correct him. Because we're there to tell a story. And there are facts. And if I botch one of the facts, it needs to be corrected.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. We're on the same page on that. You have been generous with your time. I did want one final question to ask. People here in the Twin Cities feel really great when they watch a Timberwolves game now with Michael Grady as the voice. And I know you worked with him for a number of years.
Michael,
how talented is he? Holy cow.
He's very talented, and he's been so generous. He's given me credit many times for mentoring him. I gave him his first NBA work. He worked with me as my analyst in the playoffs. Oh, this might be back in 11 or 12. He was a local radio talk show host. Later on, he became a local TV guy. He was our PA guy. And then he left that to go work for the Brooklyn Nets, and he did some stuff with the Yankees. He's really talented. But I will say this, and if he's listening, he probably will be surprised to hear me say this. He's talented. That was never at issue. But he had I don't know if you ever watched him do sideline work. He was good at it, but he had this little quirk where he always chuckled for no apparent reason that I could see. And I thought, man, that's not going to play well over 2 hours. He doesn't do it now.
Yeah.
He's extraordinarily talented. He's a rising star in the business. He's going to be one of the primary NBA voices next season. And I spoke to him when we played there. And I don't know what his status with the Wolves was. He was hoping to be able to stay and do the Wolves and the national stuff. And I hope he can, because I watch games. It's part of my job to know what's going on. And there are a very select few broadcasts that I really like because the broadcasters value their credibility. They clearly want their team to win, which is fine with me.
Yeah.
But they're willing to point out mistakes their team makes. They're willing to be objective and praise the other team if needed. And Michael and Jim Peterson are one of the best teams in the NBA. And I'm not saying that because I mentored Michael, and Jim and I went to the same high school.
I was going to say, you two St. Louis Park guys hang together, right? Yeah.
We didn't go at the same time. I'm older than him. He was there after me. But I listened to those guys. And for that matter, if you can't get to a television, Alan does a great job.
Alan's amazing.
The radio broadcast.
Yeah.
So you're lucky there with the coverage of the Timberwolves, and I couldn't be happier for Michael. He's a great guy, and he's already a success, and he's going to be even more successful, I think, as the years go by.
Yeah, his play-by-play is great, as you mentioned, great voice, and he's got it down. So the last I had heard is that I think he is going to try to do the double, where he'll do as many local broadcasts as he can, and then have the national work too. And a lot of guys do that, so I think it's workable, which is great, So.
As long as you can hang on to a guy like that, you should do so, even if it means, okay, he's not doing all the games. He's doing 90% of the games. Yeah. To have a guy, now there is a number, and it varies from franchise to franchise. There is a number. If it got too low, it's just not worth it anymore. I don't know what that number would be there.
Yeah.
But I hope that you all can hang on to him for a long time, because he's a huge asset to your market.
Yeah, no question. Well, you're a huge asset to the NBA. You're a treasure. It was a great call last night. We would love to see the Indiana Pacers win a championship, and you be along for that ride.
Me too. And one of the real kicks I get out of, my sister lives in St. Paul, and her and her husband, when they watch our games, they listen to our broadcast and sync it up. And last night after the game, I got a text from her that said, you said the Pacers never led until 3-10. That's not correct. They were ahead in the first. Like, she's correcting me. She was wrong, but she's correcting me anyway. And so it's kind of cool to know that your sister's listening in some faraway land. When I started, the only way you could hear games outside of your market is if the station had a strong enough signal that you could pick it up at night. Now you could be in China and listen to anyone's game you want. Anybody. It's a whole different thing, technology. And it's cool to have my sister there. I take great pride in my Minnesota roots, Mike. I've been here for 37 years. That's way over half my life, and our fans will say, and by the way, I'm grateful for this, you're a Hoosier now. Yeah. And that to people in our state is the highest possible compliment, and I take it that way, but I will never not be a Minnesotan, ever.
As we say here, you're one of us.
Yes, well, we say that in Indiana too.
Yeah, exactly.
I still, to this day, when I see somebody, like I'm out, I go out to a local watering hole that's like 3 minutes from my house every now and again. And when I see someone I haven't seen for a while and they want to, hey, they say cheers. I say skol.
That is it. Well, Mark,
Minnesota guy.
Yeah,
skol
it is. And now they've got the Vikings with the skol chant as well. Mark, again, really appreciate your time. I know you're in the middle of this run, and it was great to catch up. Great to hear your voice, and great to talk some Minnesota and talk some Sportscaster Camp of America from 1990 with Ronald Reagan.
I was your counselor. I can't.
You were. Yes, you were. How did the pass get there? Did he lob it? Did he bounce it? The other thing, now I'm going to keep you another 30 seconds. I said in the one of the tape critiques, I said he climbed the ladder to get a rebound. I said he climbed the ladder, and you said, don't do that. Don't. He said, come up with your own stuff. You said, come up with your own stuff. Don't say climb the ladder. That's somebody else's deal. And so I took that to heart too, trying to get creative. Now, Ron Gonder, who you and I know, he was another one of my mentors in Iowa. He had a list of stuff, and I still have it actually right here at my desk. And I will sometimes peruse that. And I do admit I will pilfer a few sayings that the great, Big Shoe, as he's called in Iowa, has said, including the first basket of every game. He used to say, Mark Boyle got the first pickle out of the jar, is what he would call it if a guy made a basket.
You know why that's not bad? Because it's his.
It's his. Well, I have stolen it.
From.
Yeah, I stole it from him. So I use it now. But it's. I've given it credit. I've given him credit. It's a tribute to him as my mentor, and he gave me permission. And I think his daughter actually lives in here in the Twin Cities, and she has heard it on occasion, and she's gotten a chuckle out of it. So.
Well, one of my things that I've used over the years, I don't use it every time, but if it's a particularly crucial basket and an and one, I will say, for example, Turner in the lane, count it and put him on the line.
Yeah, nice.
Well, Grady stole that, so Grady uses that now, and I'm always really.
Yeah, yes, pilfer that.
I've given you credit.
It's great. Well,
actually, the old imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. I'm okay with guys stealing my stuff.
There you go. Well, Mark, thanks so much. Continued success in this postseason run. Great catching up, and thanks again.
Hey, and congratulations to you. How long have you been there? 20 years?
I'll be starting my 20th season this fall for Gopher Athletics.
And you know this, in our business, that's a really long run.
Yeah.
And I just know from social media and my own observations listening to your games, you guys are highly thought of, and you should be really proud of what you've done there.
Well, thank you. It's funny, too, as you get now to hear, there does become a point at which you transform to this, well, he's a young, talented up-and-comer, to now you're just, I'm just an old man now that's been here for a while.
When I took this job, I was the youngest guy in the league. Some of the players were older than me and some were younger. And then eventually I was old enough to be their dad, then their grandfather. And I've been blessed with really good health. So I never actually feel old. But every once in a while, something happens that reminds me I am old. And I'll give you a specific example. Not this season, but last season on opening night, the Pacers roster did not include a single player that was born when I started. So, no, yeah, you are old.
Yeah, here we are, right? Here we are. No, and I get that now, too, because, we're in 2025. College players, when they get to campus, they're born in like 2008 now, 2009. And I'm like,
well, the other side of that is you probably have guys on your teams that are older than you.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Now, with
guys are staying around centuries now.
Yeah, he's a 42nd year senior now with collecting NIL for sure.
His ninth school.
Yeah, we've had a few of those guys for sure.
Yeah, well, that's the way the game is now.
Exactly.
It's always changing.
It is for sure. All right, well, very good. This time I mean it. I'll let you go. You can get on with your day. It was truly a great experience, and I know people enjoy listening.
My pleasure. Thank you. Anytime.
It's episode 174, the Go Gopher Podcast. My thanks to the radio voice of the Indiana Pacers, Mark Boyle, for joining me this week on the Go Gopher Podcast. I know you enjoyed listening to our conversation as much as I enjoyed being a part of it. Mark Boyle and the Pacers continue with the finals next week. Episode 174 is presented by Sunbelt Business Advisors and True North Mergers and Acquisitions. If you're buying or selling a business, visit sunbeltminnesota.com or tnma.com. We're also partnered with Affinity Plus Federal Credit Union, a locally member-owned full-service financial invested in you. You can learn more at affinityplus.org/Go Gophers. That's affinityplus.org/Go Gophers. OnX Hunt also sponsors our show. Happy hunting. Again, I'd invite you to listen to past podcasts, and please right now click that subscribe button to the Go Gopher Podcast. It's free to subscribe and free to listen at any time. And please share the link to the podcast with others so they can subscribe and listen as well. And if you enjoyed the podcast, please let us know with some positive feedback on your social media channels. We'll talk again next week.